Hey, true believers, do you love politics? Do you love comic books? Well, Superhero Politics is for you. It combines the comical nature of politics and the political nature of comic books. Join us, like, share, and experience the world of comics and politics in a way that you never have before. This is Superhero Politics, and I'm your host, Michael Holmes. Welcome back, folks, and Happy New Year. I know that seems kind of late considering that we're almost at the end of January, but hey, it is a new year. It's 2023. 2022 went by, and hey, we made it back. So welcome back to Superhero Politics. This is your host, Michael Holmes, and it's really great to be back with you guys. I know last time we were together was a few months ago, and we talked about what was going on there, but new year, new time, and we'll get into some new topics. So really just wanted to come back and say it's good to be with you. Thank you guys for continuing to support the podcast. Thank you guys for all your follows on TikTok and YouTube and everywhere else. And even though the content hasn't been as free flowing as I had hoped it would be, but you guys are still there supporting and being heroes and being super, just like I knew you guys would. So, hey, topic for this year is for this episode is, hey, new year, new me, new stuff. So a lot of things that go on in both comics, the comic world, and in the political world. We had the midterm elections. We had the seemingly implosion of the DC universe. We had Marvel Phase 4. We had Wakanda Forever, the second half of the second outing for Ryan Coogler and the Black Panther franchise. We had the announcement of Marvel Phase 5. So a lot of things going on. We had one of the most embarrassing and most train wreckish speaker votes in the history of America happen on Capitol Hill with Kevin McCarthy. So there was so much that went on in the world of both politics and comics and at the end of 2022 and the start of 2023. But we'll kind of kick it off with the red wave that wasn't. So back in November, Republicans who thought that this environment was completely set up for them to be able to just roll through Democrats. And typically, if you look at the history of American politics, the party out of power generally does pretty well in the midterm elections. And so all we heard up until this point was the red wave is coming. It's going to sweep the Democrats away. Sleepy Joe Biden is going to, and all of a sudden, we looked up and poof, red wave turned into the red wedding. And so Democrats held on, and not only held on, but expanded briefly their majority in the Senate and fought to pretty much a stalemate when it comes to the congressional House majority. So Republicans did take over the House. They did capture the majority in the House, but it was a far slimmer margin than they originally thought. There were people throwing around numbers like 100 seats. Like 100 seats were going to turn over. And so it was just kind of anticlimactic for Republicans. And so as we get into this episode today, we're going to talk about that expectations, and we're going to connect that to the expectation of the DCEU, the DC Extended Universe, the DC movie universe, and just kind of look at the dismantling of DC in films. And so, James Gunn, who directed Guardians of the Galaxy, he come over and he took over DC, and first it started out with this bang. I mean, we finished up the year with Black Adam, which was a much hyped movie by The Rock, with starring as Teth Adam, Black Adam. And folks were geeked because there was always this will he or won't he thing going on with Henry Cavill as Superman, beloved Superman, one of the best portrayals that we've ever had. And it was going to be, is he going to come back? Is he not going to come back? What's going to happen? And so The Rock, flexing his proverbial muscles, no pun intended, decided that he was going to forego his association, Black Adam's, the character's association with Shazam, who March 17th, Shazam Fury of the Gods is coming out. Go check it out. I'm actually kind of excited for that. But Black Adam obviously is a Shazam hero. He is in the Shazam franchise. He, has taken on a life of his own as his own kind of, hero slash anti-hero type, very Doctor Doom-esque character who is the ruler of a fictional nation of Kahndaq, and obviously Doctor Doom is the fictional ruler of Latveria and Marvel, and they're very much kind of anti-heroes, even though Doom mostly plays the villain opposite Fantastic Four and other hero teams. But Black Adam or The Rock vis-a-vis Black Adam decided that he was too big to associate with Shazam, and he needed to be juxtaposed versus brightest star in DC, which is always going to be Superman. And so Henry Cavill, who has been, kind of a perfect gentleman about this, decided, hey, I'm here. I want to keep playing the character. I love it. I got a great response from the fans, great rapport with the fans. Hey, I'm back if you guys want me. But the creative differences between where Zack Snyder left the DCEU and where James Gunn sees the DCEU going was just too broad of a cavern. So there was a bunch of casualties in this. So you look at Batgirl with Alexa Grace got canceled. A bunch of other things that were on the horizon are in jeopardy. The DC Arrowverse and the HBO offerings, TV offerings, all are ending. Doom Patrol is in their 4th season. Titans is ending this year after their 4th season. Stargirl just ended. Flash is on the 9th and final season. Naomi only survived roughly a season and a half. Black Lightning, 3 seasons. And so that was kicked off by the cancellation of Arrow 2 years ago. And so slowly but surely, DC has been kind of culling the herd when it comes to their offerings on both the small screen and kind of tempering their pulling their punches on the big screen. So if you actually step back and take a look, Cavill is out as Superman. Affleck is out as Batman, and there's no plans for Robert Pattinson to assume the Batman of the Gunn universe. And you have the only remaining character there is from a previous movie is Jason Momoa as Aquaman. And so Aquaman 2 is still slated to come out, but there's also rumors that they're going to retcon Jason Momoa from being Aquaman over to being Lobo. And so that would be a huge change. I don't know if anybody would be really mad at that. Even though Aquaman was a very successful film, made over $1 billion, Jason Momoa is universally people kind of dig him as Aquaman, as Arthur Curry. But they also always pictured Lobo as this gruff, kind of long-haired, gravelly voiced, kind of Jason Momoa-esque character. And so I think if he was able to be moved over to Lobo, I think I don't know if anybody would be upset. But what does that mean for the rest of the Justice League and solo movies? So the surprising point is that Ezra Miller is still apparently going to be around as the Flash. And this dude essentially went nuts, kidnapping, grooming, it was like a whole bunch of crazy shit that he did. And people thought of anybody who was going to be gone, that Ezra Miller is going to be the one that's going to be gone. But apparently he's going to stick around. And so that leaves just, I can't believe I'm about to say this. Oh, I can't believe it. Gal Gadot is apparently out as Wonder Woman. Now, don't get me wrong. Wonder Woman 84 was not what anybody was expecting it to be. But Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman it's an inspired casting. So if we look at this, it's completely deconstructed this entire universe. And when we talk about ideologies and the differences in ideologies and visions, and we're going to connect this to politics here in a second, but when we talk about the difference in ideology and vision, this is what we're talking about. There's a complete transition from Jeff Johns to Zack Snyder to now James Gunn, who is coming in and bringing the vision, and things change over. Now, for sometimes these things end up being elevated. Sometimes they go higher. So you look at what Joss Whedon did with Justice League. And then when Zack Snyder came back, Justice League was, essentially trash. I mean, but by any scope of superhero movie criteria, it was terrible. But what Zack Snyder was able to do was able to come back and reconstitute that movie, reshoots, add in characters that were missing. Harry Lennox as Martian Manhunter was able to put back some of the missing scenes, those great things that we saw in the Comic-Con trailers that got us so hyped up about Justice League. The scene with Kiersey Clemons and Ezra Miller and Flash as Iris West. Like, those scenes all came back in the 4-hour version of the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. But that wasn't going to hold, because Zack Snyder was not interested in taking on stewardship of that universe. And so DC had to do something, because obviously Warner Brothers is trying to compete with Marvel and Disney, and they're just churning out content. Billion-dollar movie after billion-dollar movie after billion-dollar movie, TV shows. And this was one of the places where DC was always ahead of Marvel. Animated films and TV product. And so now with Disney Plus, you've got, Moon Knight, Werewolf by Night. You've got the little cute I Am Groups. You've got the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. You've got, Loki. You've got Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You got all these products that are coming out in DC and Marvel TV, and DC is falling apart. And so now it's going to take a restructure of ideology to be able to salvage that universe. Because here's the thing, without that counterbalance, without the ability to put something or a product up to compete with Marvel, Marvel runs the risk of complacency and putting out bad product. And some people say it already happens, because Phase 4 was underwhelming by any scope of Marvel levels of expectation. Phase 4 was underwhelming. And so a lot of people didn't really jive or find it Phase 4 that gratifying. So people are already said that Marvel is starting to get complacent and starting to slip. And so this is an opening for DC, and I know that they're competing companies and they're competing universes, but really this is for the fans who have really been blessed over the last 12 to 13 years. For comic geeks like myself, for sci-fi geeks like myself, this has been a pretty damn good run of great content, of superhero content. Like, I didn't ever think in my life that I would be able to just turn on the TV, turn on streaming services, turn on anything. Like, not just streaming or going to the theaters, but I'm talking about network TV. I'm talking about even studios who normally don't dabble in superhero content dug into superhero content. And we had some funny things out there. You had great stuff, Invincible on Prime Video, The Boys, all these things. People are really embracing the superhero genre, and there's so much diversity and so much opportunity there for people, new writers, new content creators to come in. Even, podcasts like Superhero Politics are able to find this kind of niche for people like myself who grew up reading all these books and now have a way to talk about it, and not feel like you're, an outcast or, and now there are communities. There are cultures of superhero superhero consumers and content and comic book content that are out here for people from 8 to 80 who are now interested in these things. And so, but the content has to stay relevant. The content has to stay timely. It has to stay great. And if you go into the books right now, I am reading Action Comics 1050. Because my boy Superman finally got that upgrade. He got that Beyonce that let me upgrade you. And we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode. But you're starting to see the writing the writing in books has been consistently lagging behind the films, now kind of catching up, and it's great. But the films have got to stay consistent because to cultivate new audiences, you have to have a message that people can resonate with, or you have to have a message that resonates with people. And so, as we look at the DCEU revamping its message, that brings me to the connection of politics and modern conservatism. And so, when we look at modern conservatism, when we look at where it is now, it's essentially in the same spot that the DCEU is in. The DCEU is essentially really kind of burning itself out, kind of like a phoenix to rise from the ashes. And so a lot of people will say, Mike, you're not a conservative. Why do you care? Well, just like I said earlier about having an opposing or competing view. Like Marvel will get complacent with their content if DC is not there to give people an opportunity to go into the theaters to choose something. Like say for instance that Marvel puts out a film and DC doesn't put out a film in the same month. Marvel will clean up that space. And so by the time DC puts out a film, Marvel has kind of sucked up all the oxygen. And so you got to have that competition, or the one who is moving will get complacent, has the potential to get complacent, and then it starts to put out bad product. And so the reason why I say this in terms of politics is because when you take a step back and you look at how shitty the Republican Party has been and how terrible conservatism has performed over the last half century, this is not just a threat to democracy and a threat to a representative democracy and a threat to political choice. This is also a threat to progressivism and a threat to the Democratic Party. And you'll say, man, okay, Dems and this. No, this is not a joke. This is not a joke. This is the political economics that we talk about in terms of supply and demand. Democrats have absolutely, to the best of their ability with the way this country is divided, delivered on what they're supposed to do as a Democratic Party. When you talk about major legislation, when you talk about big time transformational bills, they have been busting the Republican Party's ass. And people laugh and they underestimate Joe Biden and they laugh, Sleepy Joe didn't come out of his basement, did anything. Well, Sleepy Joe didn't come out of the basement and got 81 million votes. Sleepy Joe passed gun laws for the first time in 40 years. Joe Biden passed a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. There's been a ton of legislation passed, and Republicans keep kikiing and they can't figure out why they can't seem to get over the top. If the midterms was not a wake-up call, I don't know what it's going to take. But just like Zack Snyder and just like James Gunn, there has to be a reformatting. Somebody has to come in to the Republican Party, to the conservative movement, and say, enough. There has to be some type of reconstitution of conservatism and of the Republican Party, which is the vehicle for the conservative ideology. There has to be. Because if not, then what's going to happen is this country will continue to shift and shift and shift. Now, look here, I'm here for it. Now, I'm not going to lie. I want to burn them to the ground. I want to burn the Republican Party to ash. I don't even want to leave ashes. That's where I am. And not because I necessarily hate conservatism. It's that it's the performance of conservatism that has been so awful. It's been antagonistic in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Florida, if you're looking at what's happening around the country, if you're looking at the attack on the centers of democracy, especially for people of color, that is led by the conservative ideology. They've decided that they're not going to improve themselves. They're not going to put out better content. What they're going to do is kill the competition and stop the people who would vote against them from voting. That's essentially like saying that DC, rather than put out better films, rather than put out better comics, is going to sue to stop Marvel from releasing content. That's essentially the tact that the Republican Party has taken when it comes to the choice in politics in this country. We're not going to get any better. We're not going to produce anything. We're not going to change. We're just going to stop you from choosing someone else that you like better. And that's a losing ideology, not just for electoral politics. It's a losing ideology for America as a constitutional republic. And so when you take a step back and you think, well, Mike, you're a progressive, like you want change to happen in a progressive manner. Yes, I do. But I also don't want my party, or I don't want my ideology to fall into the same trap as Republicans fell into. See, the thing that caught Republicans was that they had this scheme of gerrymandering and the Electoral College. So instead of letting our voters choose our representative, we're going to let the representative choose the voters. And it was successful for them. And frankly, the only reason that they captured the majority in the House in this election was the fact that their redistricting plan went through in 2 states, and the Democrats' redistricting plan didn't go through in 2 states. Because here's the thing. If that redistricting plan in New York had gone through, the Republicans would not have a majority in Congress right now. Democrats would still have both houses of Congress. And that would have been the most monumental fail in the history of American politics. I would say in 100 years. Because this was the most ripe and most fertile political environment for the Republican Party that it could have been. You had massive inflation, costs are up, gas prices are high. People are struggling to make ends meet, and even though there's a lot of jobs being created and everything else, people are feeling it in their pockets, man. Like they getting hit in the pockets. And Republicans said, you know what? We're not going to offer any solutions. We're going to sit back and let this anger and this mass psychosis that we believe based on conventional wisdom just sweep the Democratic Party out. That's what we're going to do. We're not going to offer anything new. We're going to wait for the Democratic Party to fail. And that's what DC has done. DC said we're not going to produce better content. People will eventually get tired of Marvel, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard before. Because Marvel does not have the iconic characters that DC has. Because think about this. Think about the first superhero movie that you can remember seeing. What was it? Superman. Christopher Reeve, 1972, the Bruce Donner film. It's the first one you remember seeing. Really? The classic superhero. Now, I mean, you had things like the Phantom on TV, and you had, stuff like that. But the first feature film that you remember really seeing was that Superman film. And then later on, what'd you have? Batman. And then Wonder Woman on TV. There were no Marvel characters on TV. Then Spider-Man came in the late 90s, but that was the first one. Then maybe Blade. Marvel jumped into it, but they were not that good at it. And so they've learned. And while DC got complacent because they had a market, they had it cornered because they had the iconic characters. By God, you got the Trinity. You got Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Like, you got the Trinity. You got the three most famous superheroes on the planet. There's not a group, there's not a single Marvel character, even if you include Captain America and Spider-Man, that's as popular as any one of those. And that got DC very complacent. Because on Saturday morning, what did you get up to watch? Super Friends. You got that big bowl of Cocoa Puffs or Rice Krispies or whatever it is that you ate, and you got up. Why? Because you wanted to catch Super Friends. Or you wanted to catch Super Friends or the Superpowers team, whatever iteration that it came in, you wanted to catch that. You wanted to see, Apache Chief and Black Vulcan, and you wanted to see the Wonder Twins, Zan and Jay. You got up to see them because DC had those iconic characters, but they fumbled the bag. And I know fumble the bag is probably a little old, but I like it. I'm going to keep it. So they fumbled it. They fumbled the bag. And so they got complacent and they stopped putting out new ideas and new content. And the Republican Party has done that too. So they used to be the party of ideas, man. If you go back and take a look at the 1966, 67, 68, 69, all the way up to probably 71 Republican Party platform, it was chock full of ideas on labor reform, on health care, on women's rights. They were pro-choice party. They believed in the individual freedom of a woman to choose and of what she wanted to do with her body. They were all about those things. They were about reforming banks. They were about stopping oligopolies. They were a party that could actually compete for the votes of every American because they put forth ideas. But then something happened in that 1972, 70 to 80 range, man. They got infected by some of the worst elements in this country. They got infected by big business, and they got infected by, this evangelical fascist religion. And they forgot, and they started to lose their way. And then they realized, oh my God, people are on to us. So we've got to repackage it. And so that's when Ronald Reagan came in. He came out of old Hollywood, and he was this character that he played, but underneath it all was the same bad policies. And it got him over. But you can't keep putting out the same movie over and over and over again and think people are going to come and see it with fresh eyes. And so while the Democratic Party was assembling this new coalition of people of color, of women, of immigrants, putting forth policies on immigration, putting forth policies on LGBTQ rights, putting forth policies on diversity and equity. While they were doing all these things, they were putting together policies on labor, putting out these fresh ideas. The Republican Party, or DC, was resting on its old laurels and letting their iconic characters be overwhelmed by these fresh new characters that nobody had ever heard of. People didn't know Iron Man. I remember going to the theaters in 2008, sitting in there with a bunch of people. They had no idea who the hell Iron Man was. I remember going seeing Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage, and nobody knew who Ghost Rider was. I remember going to see the first Avenger, Captain America, and people barely knew who that was. And now you see people running around all the time talking about, Marvel this, Marvel that, watching it. It's like it's become its own culture. That should have not happened. Why? Because DC had that much of a head start. The Republican Party had that much recognition. Democrats were digging themselves out of the Carter years. They were digging themselves out of that. And so Republicans had a chance to kind of cement themselves as that party that people could turn to and be home. But they got infected by those elements and they lost their way. And so that allowed the Democratic Party to assume the view of America. The Democratic Party became to reflect what America looks like, and it quickly allowed them to be able to run off a string of elections. Even though we had Republican presidents during that time, the popular vote in this country completely belongs to the Democratic Party. It will be nearly impossible for a Republican president to ever win the popular vote in this country. It's nearly going to be impossible. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 8.1 million votes. That is a ass thumping in an election. Like, go back and look at the margins of the last 4 Democratic nominees in terms of the margin of popular votes in this country. Barack Obama beat John McCain by 10 million votes. He beat Mitt Romney by 6 million votes. That's a 16 million vote margin just in Barack Obama alone. Then you go over to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by 3.5 million votes. So we're talking about a 19, almost 20 million vote difference between the parties. Then you throw in Joe Biden's win against Donald Trump, 8 million more votes. You're talking about a 28 million vote difference between the last 4 Republican nominees and the last 4 Democratic nominees on the Democratic side. That's because the Republican Party has no vision for itself. It has no vision for its universe. And this is what we're saying about the difference between what Marvel has done and what DC has done. DC has had no constructive vision for how it wants to appeal to consumers other than just being a superhero movie. People vote for Republicans simply because they're not Democrats and you don't like the people who are in the Democratic Party. You can ask any Republican out there, why do you vote Republican? What do you vote for them for? And they'll tell you what they're against. They will never tell you what they're for. And that is unsustainable. So this is why James Gunn has such a monumental challenge. This is why the Republican Party has a monumental challenge, because what they have looming over them is the demands of their constituents, of their consumers. Because they may want to go in a creative direction, James Gunn, who may wants to diversify some of his characters, whether that be racially, whether that be gender-wise. And you see the blowback that happened. Marvel changed up some characters. They changed Ajax. They gender bent Ajax and the Eternals, and people went nuts. Yahya Mateen II, Abdul Mateen, is going to be Wonder Man, Simon Williams, in an upcoming film, and people went nuts. The Little Mermaid is black, and people went nuts. Batgirl, Leslie Grace, was black, and people went nuts. And those are things, when it comes to changing, that is hard for a party to get away from. And what has captured and held on to the Republican Party is their allegiance on white, straight evangelicals, and they have not figured out a way to produce content that can appeal to people of color and the LGBTQ plus community. They haven't figured it out. And so they keep putting out this same movie over and over and over. Critical race theory, trans kids, bathrooms, grooming. They keep putting these things out over and over and over, and they can't figure out why people are not showing up to the theaters, i.e. the polls, and voting for them. They can't figure it out. Somebody out there knows. But those people are powerless to be able to make the change. And this is what James Gunn is going to run into as he assumes the DC universe. Because people don't like change. People don't want to change. They don't want to give up Henry Cavill as Superman. They don't want to give up Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. They didn't want to give up Ben Affleck as Batman, even though they didn't want Ben Affleck in the first place and they fought against it. But once they got him, they didn't want to let him go. They don't want to give that up. So he's going to have a hell of a time trying to convince people that his vision for the DCEU is one that everybody should get behind. And it's going to be the same thing for the Republican Party to convince the people of this country to get behind them when they have this 40-year record of absolute ineptitude, complete and utter dog crap that they put out for the last 40 years. And they're going and saying, hey, don't worry about the crappy stuff that we put out, the crappy policies / films that we've put out. Those guys over there are woke. They're changing your favorite characters and they're blotting you out. They're replacing you. So that's why you should continue to vote for us. And people are like, nah, you gotta give me something in order for me to support you and vote for you. The midterms was a wholesale rejection of the Republican Party and its message. And when you look at what happened with Black Adam and how poorly it performed, even though you look at the numbers and they're huge numbers, but if you look at the hype behind this movie, if you look how long that this movie has been in queue, over a decade that they've been trying to make this movie, if you look at the way it was received, the characters, everything, even though Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate was chef's kiss, if you look at the way it was received, it was anticlimactic. And so the Republican Party has got to find a vision that does not include the worst things that they've done over the last 40 years. Or I'm going to say the last 8 years. Because the thing looming over their head is Donald Trump and his ideology. The MAGA ideology has essentially, like a venom symbiote, taken over the Republican Party. It has essentially consumed it. And they can't break free. And so if the Republican Party is going to survive, if the DCEU is going to survive, they've got to be able to shed those negatives and that negative history and emerge with a clear-cut, positive vision around their candidates and characters, around their messaging. They've got to put together a cohesive strategy for delivery. If you look at what Marvel has done, if you look at what the Democratic Party has done, they have a deep bench. Hakeem Jeffries coming behind Nancy Pelosi. If you look at how Kevin Feige set up the Marvel Universe, introducing individual characters, their individual movies, then bringing them together in the Avengers movies, then bringing them, how they folded in the Sony and Fox properties with the X-Men and the Multiverse of Madness, how they did all that stuff. It was planned out. There was no vision like that on the DC side, and there's no vision like that on the Republican side. And if you want to juxtapose what Marvel did versus what the Democrats did, the Democrats had a slim majority, slimmer than what Kevin McCarthy has now in the House. And they were able to pass all these things. Why? Because they had a vision and a plan. And you can agree with it politically or you can disagree with it politically, but you can't disagree with the outcomes of what they accomplished when nobody thought they would. You've got a 50-50 Senate. You've got a 5-seat majority in the House. There is no way you're passing this kind of legislation. And they passed everything. They got everything. Now, you might say they could have gone a little bit further, but then you're being disingenuous. Even the folks who are, mindset kind of like mine, who want a, big sweeping agenda, I even got to step back and say, well, damn, they kicked ass right here. I didn't expect them to get this. And they got more than I asked for, more than I expected. And so you kind of step back and you say, hey, Kevin Feige, this was an incredible strategy and plan. James Gunn, you were in the Marvel Universe. You did this. You did some of this. Can you export that over to DC? And now if you look at who are the leaders now of the Republican and Democratic parties, you look at Hakeem Jeffries, who is fabulous, fantastic young leader. And you look at Kevin McCarthy, who is essentially a toting and carrying the water for Donald Trump, a lapdog who has surrendered the little bit of power that he had already to the lowest common denominators in his party. And you think this is going to turn out differently. 2024 is coming up. There are going to be some special elections that happen in the next few months and weeks and years. And if Republicans start dropping these special elections, if they start losing these special elections, there's going to be panic for 2024. Because here's the thing. Donald Trump is already running for president again. He's already announced. No one else has moved into the field. Nobody else has stepped in to say they're going to run for president on the Republican side. Now, we all know Ron DeSantis is going to run. We all know Nikki Haley's going to run. We all know probably Ted Cruz is going to run. Rand Paul is, kind of taking up the family business of the Paul family of running and getting their head torn off and being out by the first primary, first caucuses. But that's kind of the also-rans. I mean, there could be Glenn Youngkin up in Virginia. There could be a few. But none of them are going to be able to really stand on stage against a former president and be able to do it, especially when Kevin McCarthy and all of conservative media is continuing to foment his hold and solidify his hold on the party. Now, on the Democratic side, you're looking around at who could run. Joe Biden definitely could run for re-election, and more than likely he'll win. He could step aside, and Kamala Harris could step up. There could be someone else. There could be someone who comes from within the ranks. Hakeem Jeffries could step up. Joaquin Castro. There could be some other folks that could come out and say, "Hey, we're gonna step up and take the lead." Gretchen Whitmer out of Michigan, governor who completely took back Michigan. Every single house, the General Assembly, Senate, Attorney General, Treasurer, everything in Michigan is Democrat right now. And Gretchen Whitmer is powerful. So she could be that one who steps in there if there's Biden-Harris fatigue. But there's got to be a plan and a vision. Democrats have one, Republicans don't, and their ideology is killing them. And this is why we kind of tie this thing into a bow when we talk about this, and this is biblical, and it says, my people will perish for lack of knowledge when there's no vision. And the Republican Party is dying, and conservatism is dying, and the DCEU is dying because there has not been a vision to maintain it and hand it over to generations to come. There are generations of conservatives who have no idea what to believe. There are generations of Republicans who are growing up with no political home and no political standing, no political guardrails, no political foundation because they haven't been given one. The only thing that they know is Democrats bad, liberals bad, MAGA, and that's unsustainable. And so the message here in terms of providing balance, because you know how Thanos said that all things should be in balance, providing political balance is the party that's up right now needs to keep itself together and continue to think about its audience and put out great content. And the party that's out in the wilderness has to think about producing something that can attract people to them to give people political choice. That keeps us balanced. That keeps the balances between the universes steady. Because if not, then they're going to crash and we're going to have an incursion. And the next thing you know, the political world is going to be destroyed. Just like DC right now is hopefully rebuilding itself. And hopefully all these things that I've enjoyed for the last decade plus are not just going away. They're going to come back stronger. And even though, trust me, I have no love for conservative politics, it's a necessity in our body politic to be able to have that counterbalance between my subscribed ideology and someone else's so that we can have a very good political discourse and good dialogue. Hey, I sit on a governing body, and I have folks that I don't align with politically. But guess what? We get together offline and we hash it out. We yell at each other. We meet and then we go get something to eat. And then we go back and yell at each other again. And somewhere in the middle of all those tough words and disagreements is a policy that we can all get behind. Because recently, here's the thing, there's something that a lot of the conservatives on my council that serve with me on council were vehemently opposed to. But guess what? You get in a room and you talk about these things and you see that the difference between these things are philosophical, and then you can break down where you can find the meeting of the minds. And then next thing you know, it goes from being a 5-4 majority vote where I push it through to being a 7-2 vote. in a bipartisan fashion. It can be done, but it can't be done if the other side has nothing to offer but political platitudes and hate speech. And the Republican Party right now has nothing to offer but political platitudes and hate speech. So here's my message to both the DCEU and the conservative universe. Get your shit together and put out a great message so that we can continue to have a balance. I don't want to avoid DC movies. I grew up on DC. I cut my teeth on DC. The first comic book that I ever read cover to cover was a Flash comic book. I have Superman as my favorite hero. I mean, every iteration of Superman I've supported. But I don't want to avoid this simply because you put out trash. I don't want to have to simply rely on Marvel for this great content because that's not a diverse world. Two different characters, two different character universes. That's the greatness about this diversity of this content, is that you can get such a different offering of characters from both of these universes if they're good. I don't want to just have to go and watch DC for the sake of watching DC. And I don't want to avoid DC because it's terrible content. The fans deserve better, comic book world, superhero world, and the voters deserve better, political world. And folks, that is the essence of superhero politics, is that it is a bridge between these two worlds. They are not dissimilar. You have two competing entities, DC and Marvel. You have two competing entities, the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and the Progressive Party and the Democratic Party and the progressive movement. There's two sides competing for each other. And one side right now is in utter chaos. You got the Republican Party who led an insurrection because they lost an election. And you've got DC who is liquidating all of their content and all of their titles, trying to figure it out and rebuild themselves. So these things are running parallel with each other. But what we've got to do is we've got to have that counterbalance. And so I hope that James Gunn can find a way to listen to both the fans and his own vision and align them and put together something that can be attractive to all people, not just the hardcore comic book fans like myself, but to all people who are new to comics, who are coming in. Because here's the thing about the politics side of this, and when I address the Republican Party and conservative movement, people hate politics. Why? Because politics is seen as dirty and grimy and unseemly, and nobody wants to do it, but they vote simply because they feel like it's their duty. But if you look at the voting percentages in this country, it is way down from where it should be. We should be in the 70, 80, 90% of votes. And we're jumping for joy and popping bottles when we get 40% of participation. Why? Because we're not putting out things that attract people to the polls. And eventually, if we don't listen to the fans, if we don't listen to the voters, we're not going to attract things that bring people to theaters, and we're going to continue to turn people away from their civic duty in voting. So here's my charge. That's my charge to both the political world and the comic book world. Get your shit together. Get your message straight. Listen to the people and give them what they want. All right? Coming out the gate hot with some tough love in 2023. Hey, this is a dragon level threat that we're dealing with right here with our democracy. So, hey, if you're not going to hear it from me, someone who walks between these two worlds in superhero-dom, in politics, who are you going to listen to? So, hey, folks, thank you for coming back. Happy New Year. Love you guys. Look, I have a brand new website. It's superhero-politics-podcast. at onpodium.com. It's a new website. It's there, guys. You can go check out all the content. You can donate. My PayPal. Hit up. Send me an email. Send me all the content. I'm going to read a couple of emails that I got from you guys in the next episode, just to kind of answer those to kick off. But there's a lot of great stuff coming. And so just thank you guys for hanging in there and being my heroes. It does my heart good to see the downloads continue to go up. Hey, I'm really, really close to being able to monetize this thing, guys. And so if I hit 1,000 downloads this month, I'll be able to monetize that, which will be super cool. So like, share, reach out to your friends and tell them about this really cool podcast that you're listening to called Superhero Politics. Look, love you guys. Continue to be my heroes. Continue to try to find someone to be a hero to. And always remember that you don't have to be superhuman to be a superhuman. Until next time, this is Superhero Politics, and I'm your host, Michael Holmes. What's going on, true believers? Thank you for your continued and growing support. If you're enjoying the content that we're producing here on Superhero Politics, I ask that you subscribe anywhere that you can find podcasts. That means iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. You can find us at Buzzsprout and also on our social media at Superhero Politics on Twitter, at Superhero Politics on Facebook, Superhero Politics on Instagram, and Superhero Politics on TikTok. Like, share, join us, and if you would have any topics that you would like to share or just questions that you would like to ask me, you can send your emails to superheropolitics@gmail.com, and we'll do an episode where we answer your questions. Thank you for your continued support, and remember, always speak truth to power.